as a matter of symptoms, that we have a similarity with the Soviet Union in terms of deaths of despair. The causes of these things are just, I think you have not demonstrated that they have the same root causes, that they would, and therefore would require the same sorts of solutions. Nor do I think that they get to the fundamental indictment of the Soviet Union as on a moral scale, on a philosophical scale, on an economic scale, that make the comparisons between us and them, I think, fairly spurious. And look, I mean, again, if you're going to just say that things going bad makes us like the Soviets, well, look, the British Empire failed and declined. That doesn't mean that it was like the Soviet Union. The Persian Empire failed and declined. It doesn't mean it was like the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union cannot be a metaphor for everything that goes bad in a country that is founded on completely different historical forces, intellectual concepts. I mean, go back to Werner Sombart. Why is there no socialism in America? Because we don't have a feudal past. I mean, American exceptionalism is a deep and rich subject, and I think it still applies to metaphorical comparisons to the Soviet Union, even if I'm willing to concede all this stuff about the deaths of despair.
So Jonah, the thing that strikes me in this conversation is that we're talking not about the time of Werner Sombart, but the time that we live in now. And when you try to explain the deaths of despair, the best you could come up with was that fentanyl's really cheap. Vodka was really cheap in the Soviet Union. That's not why there were deaths of despair in 1980s and 1990s Russia. And you've got to come up with a better answer than you have so far for why America has totally deviated from the trend in all the other developed countries to the point that life expectancy's got into reverse. Now, you're right. The essay then said, what else do we have in common with the Soviet Union? And I went through a list. We have a fiscal problem, which is the equivalent of the soft budget constraint that characterized the way the Soviet economy worked. And I think we have a problem in that there's a disconnect between the elite and the masses. And here's where I think you've missed something because you haven't been involved in the academic world the way I have. You say there can never be socialism in America. Well, that might have been true once, but if you
Werner
spent some
Sombart said
time,
it. I was just quoting.
Yeah, right, you're quoting Sombart. But if you were to spend some time on the campus of a major university, you'd encounter something that wasn't quite socialism, but the identity politics and neoliberalism that now flourishes in all elite institutions in the name, the Orwellian name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, is an ideology that certainly has nothing whatsoever to do with your American ideals. In fact, when you ask the proponents of critical race theory for their accounts of American history, it is that American history is white supremacy. So I think one of the things that you miss in the essay, which is actually terribly important, is that the elites no longer believe a word you're saying about the American founding, the distinctiveness of the United States. They don't believe any of that. And that's part of my argument. The nomenclatura, the elites who staff Harvard and Yale and Stanford and the foundations and run the Democratic Party and will decide whether Joe Biden is viable as a candidate, those people are the nomenclatura. They are the elite. And they don't believe a word that you say about what makes the United States different from the Soviet Union. They would also say, in many ways, it is just another empire, probably a pretty evil one. Now, when you said just because the Soviet Union and the British Empire and other empires declined, that's got somehow nothing to do with the United States, you have to consider the possibility that the United States could also turn out to be a declining empire. I argued that in a book called Colossus 20 years ago. And very few of the things I said then are less true today. So I think you might be in denial about the pathologies, not only of American public health, but of the American political elite. And that's what, troubles me. There's a certain insouciance about your response, as if it'll all be fine. But it's not doom scrolling or catastrophizing to say, no, there's a moral crisis. There's a crisis of public morale and of public health. And the United States could conceivably lose Cold War II. I certainly would hate to see how US society would cope with a hot war with China these days if one were to break out this year or next year over Taiwan. How do you think we'd do? Do you think we'd win?
I don't. I don't think we'd lose in the long run. In the short run, I think I'm more concerned about
couldn't
not
even
having
beat the
sufficient
Taliban.
deterrence to
We
prevent the
couldn't
conflict
even
in
beat
the
the
first
Taliban.
place.
This country couldn't beat the Taliban, and you think we'll win against the PLA?
I get it.
Just saying.
Look, China.
It's not a
get
good
to
look.
China. China's got a lot of problems too. But yeah, look again. I have no problem. Look, also the idea that somehow I am wallowing in my crapulence of denial about the problems with the American left-wing elite is just crazy talk. If you could go back and read what I've written for the last 25 years about all of this stuff, it's just
read it, and I read your
Suicide
Weapon.
And you think like you know how many veins of ink I have emptied out criticizing people like Ibram Kendi and the campus nonsense and all of that kind of thing. It doesn't.
Don't you think they have anything to do with the Bolsheviks?
I think the perniciousness and influence of Marxist nonsense is profound and serious, and I've been writing about it for a very long time. But
we're getting somewhere.
I think one of the
things Marxism is in the system. The Marxism is in the system. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, but it doesn't run. It doesn't run the system. It doesn't.
Really?
The state is not controlled by really.
Really?
And for yeah, really. You think the equivalent of the Bolsheviks run the entire system, right?
I think the equivalent of the Bolsheviks control most of the key institutions in the country to an extent that's quite alarming.
I think there's a new class that controls a vast amount of the commanding heights of the culture, and I've written that a gazillion times. My point. So let me just back up for a second. The malaise stuff that you're talking about again is real. It's one of the things that's generating deaths of despair. You poo-poo my point about fentanyl. So let me broaden it out. Fentanyl's a new technology. Technology changes culture in ways that ideas don't, in a very sudden and serious way. A lot of the problems that we have in this country come from things like an epidemic of loneliness. And that is a result of new technologies that have come online in the last 20 years. Jonathan Haidt argument, which you cite in your piece. Those are very serious. They're very worrisome. There's also self-correction that's going on as we speak. Schools, the LA school district has just announced they're going to ban phones in schools. On college campuses, the nomenclatura that we're talking about here is pernicious and sinister, and I think that it would be wonderful if they were all purged. We are also seeing a natural correcting response from a lot of institutions in this country. The stuff that Robert George and his imitators across this country have been doing, the stuff that Ben Sass is doing at the University of Florida. My point is that if you think there's a pie-eyed optimism unreflected in what I've written and said for the last 25 years, by the way, in my response to you, I would say there's a certain amount of fatalism and bleakness and determinism in your position. You're not willing to countenance the fact that a lot of the bad things, which we agree on are bad, are being pushed back. Ibram Kendi is now a joke. Even according to the New York Times these days, schools are banning these mandatory DEI statements. Schools have reinstated the SAT just in the last few years. Are we back to a healthy, wonderful, elite campus culture? Absolutely not. We're reaping the fruit of a long march to the institutions by the kind of people that you and I both deplore. But this idea that somehow I'm blasé about all of these things, and the proof of my blaséness is that I reject your framing of this as to say we're replaying the mistakes of the Soviet Union. I just find wholly unpersuasive.